Have you ever wondered how the wisdom of ancient philosophers still speaks to us today, cutting through centuries like a whisper that never fades? It's not carved in stone or hidden in dusty scrolls. It lives in the stories we tell. For thousands of years, storytelling has been more than entertainment. It's been a lifeline, a way to pass down the emotional survival strategies that help us endure hardship, face uncertainty, and find meaning in chaos. And few traditions understood this better than the Stoics. Think about it. When Marcus Aurelius wrote that our life is what our thoughts make it, he wasn't just offering advice. He was giving us a story about perception, one that reshapes how we see the world. That idea didn't survive by accident. It was wrapped in narratives, parables, and personal reflections, making it sticky enough to last. Stoicism isn't just a philosophy, it's a storytelling tradition. Every lesson about resilience, every reminder that we control our reactions and not external events, was designed to be remembered, retold, and lived. The Stoics knew something profound. If you want an idea to outlive you, you don't just explain it, you embed it in a story. That's why their teachings feel so alive today. They didn't just say pain is temporary. They showed it through the trials of figures like Epictetus, who rose from slavery to become a guiding voice. They didn't just preach detachment, they painted vivid scenes of loss and renewal, like Seneca's letters written in the shadow of exile. These stories aren't just history, they're emotional blueprints coded with survival strategies that still work. So what if we could crack that code? This video is about uncovering the hidden patterns in Stoic storytelling, the ways ancient narratives teach us to reframe fear, endure suffering, and reclaim agency. We'll see how a single idea, like amor fati, loving your fate, transforms from an abstract concept into a gripping story of acceptance. We'll trace how cultures across time have echoed these principles, proving that resilience isn't just a personal trait but a shared human legacy. And most importantly, we'll learn how to recognize these strategies in our own lives, because the stories we tell ourselves shape the world we live in. This isn't just about history, it's about rewriting your own narrative. Ready to begin, the Stoics didn't just argue their philosophy, they wrapped it in myths, fables, and parables because they understood something timeless. Stories bypass resistance. When you hear a dry lecture on detachment, your mind might rebel. But when you hear the tale of the dog tied to a cart, straining against its leash until it learns to run with the movement, suddenly the lesson clicks. That's Aesop, but it could just as easily be Seneca, who filled his letters with allegories like this. He didn't just tell his friend Lucilius to accept life's unpredictability. He painted a scene of sailors caught in a storm, showing how fighting the waves exhausts you, while adapting to them saves you. These stories aren't decoration, they're delivery systems for survival skills. Think of it like emotional shorthand. A child who hears the tortoise and the hare remembers persistence long before they understand willpower. In the same way, Stoic myths compress life's hardest lessons into images that stick. Take the myth of the two wolves, one representing fear, the other courage battling inside us. The punchline, the one you feed wins. It's simple, visceral, and impossible to unhear. That's why these tales outlasted empires. They don't just describe detachment, they let you practice it by proxy, rehearsing resilience through someone else's struggle before you face your own. So what stories shaped you? Maybe it was a grandparent's parable about bending like bamboo in the wind, or a book character who turned hardship into strength. Those narratives weren't just entertainment, they were your first armor. The Stoics knew armor like that has to feel light, or you'll never wear it. That's why they embedded their heaviest truths in the lightest forms, a fable about a fox and grapes becomes a masterclass in letting go of what you can't have. A sailor's story whispers that control is an illusion, but adaptability is a superpower. These aren't just lessons, they're mental tools forged in the fires of storytelling, ready when you need them most. Marcus Aurelius didn't just write his famous meditations for posterity, he wrote them to survive. Picture the most powerful man in the ancient world, the Roman emperor, sitting by candlelight, wrestling his thoughts onto parchment like a sculptor chiseling raw stone. His journal wasn't just a diary, it was a mirror, a sparring partner, a theater where he could rehearse resilience. He called his own bluffs, questioned his fears, and reframed setbacks as scenes in a play. In one passage he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not just wisdom, it's a script for emotional survival, written in real time. Think of his journal as ancient emotional coding. Every entry was a line of code debugging his mind, identifying glitches in his thinking, rewriting negative loops, and installing new protocols for clarity. When he described observing his thoughts like passing clouds, he wasn't just poetic, he was engineering distance between himself and his reactions. Modern psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to step back and witness your own mind. But Marcus didn't need a textbook, he had stories. He'd cast himself as both actor and audience, watching his life unfold like a drama, asking, "Is this scene worth my anguish?" That shift from being trapped in the plot to directing it is the heart of Stoic storytelling. Here's where it gets practical. Marcus didn't just vent on the page, he reverse-engineered his emotions. When anger flared, he'd dissect it like a playwright analyzing a character's motive. Why does this bother me? What story am I telling myself about it? In one striking passage, he imagines his thoughts as masks at a banquet, removable, temporary, not the essence of who he is. That's the power of narrative reflection. It turns chaos into composition. A modern therapist might call this cognitive restructuring. Marcus called it survival. So what's the modern equivalent? Think of journaling as your own meditations. When you write, "My boss criticized me and it ruined my day," you're stuck in the script. But when you add, "Why did that sting? What if it's not about me?" You're editing the narrative. That's the art Marcus mastered, not denying pain, but reframing it as a scene you can rewrite. Try this tonight. Take a frustration and give it a title like a play, The Meeting That Went Off Script. Then ask, what's the lesson in this act? How would the hero grow from this? Suddenly, you're not a victim of the plot, you're its author. The brilliance of Marcus's approach. He knew stories aren't just told, they're lived. Every journal entry was a rehearsal for the next challenge. When he wrote, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't just philosophizing, he was scripting his comeback before life demanded it. That's why his words outlasted Rome itself. They weren't ink on parchment, they were tools forged in the fire of self-storytelling, sharp enough to cut through centuries. Your journal can be the same. Not a record of what happened to you, but a workshop where you rebuild what happens within you. Seneca's letters to Lucilius weren't just correspondence, they were masterclasses in emotional engineering disguised as stories. Imagine receiving a letter that doesn't just tell you, "Don't fear loss," but paints a scene of a wealthy man clinging to his riches, only to lose them in a shipwreck. Suddenly, the lesson isn't abstract, it's visceral. That was Seneca's genius. He knew emotions aren't tamed by logic alone, they're disarmed by narrative. In one letter, he describes anger as a brief madness, comparing it to a storm that exhausts itself if you refuse to feed it. He didn't lecture Lucilius about self-control. He showed him a mirror, asking, "What does your anger look like when it's not yours?" Take his famous letter about grief. Instead of dry advice, Seneca recounts the story of a grieving mother who refuses to let go of her son's ashes. Then he shifts the lens. What if she'd lost not a child but a ring? The absurdity hits you. The emotion isn't denied, it's reframed. That's the power of anecdotal teaching. It sneaks past our defenses. When Seneca writes, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he's not stating a fact. He's handing you a scalpel to dissect your own fears. His letters were emotional blueprints because they worked in layers. First, the story, a relatable scene. Then, the twist, an unexpected angle. Finally, the invitation. Now apply this to your life. In one letter, he describes a crowded bathhouse where people jostle and complain. The lesson: you're not trapped by the crowd. You're trapped by your belief that the crowd should behave differently. It's storytelling as cognitive therapy. Here's where it gets personal. Seneca's letters often included prompts for Lucilius to journal, to replay his day like a theater performance and ask, where did I follow the script? Where did I improvise poorly? This wasn't just reflection, it was mental rehearsing. When he wrote, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," he was teaching Lucilius to script his resilience before fate handed him the next plot twist. So think about your own life. What's the letter or message that reshaped you? Maybe it was a friend's story about their failure that reframed your own, or a book passage that turned your fear into fuel. Seneca would call these your living letters, narratives that didn't just inform you but rewired you. Try this. The next time an emotion overwhelms you, don't just feel it, frame it. Ask, if this were a scene in a play, what would the audience learn? That's Seneca's legacy. Not just wisdom, but the tools to stage it in your own mind. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by his master's cruelty, knew suffering intimately, yet his teachings radiate a startling lightness. He didn't bury his wisdom in dense theories. He handed it out like street theater, using props as simple as a lamp or a loaf of bread. One of his most enduring lessons came from a broken jug. Picture this: a clay vessel slips from someone's hands and shatters. Most of us would wince, maybe curse. But Epictetus asked, why mourn what was never truly yours? The jug was borrowed from the universe, he'd say, and now the universe has reclaimed it. The lesson wasn't about pottery, it was about attachment. That shattered jug became a metaphor for every loss, every change we futilely resist. Here's the twist: Epictetus wasn't teaching resignation. He was mapping the boundaries of control. The jug's breaking wasn't in your power, but your reaction, that sovereign territory. This was his core code for emotional survival. Divide every experience into what's yours to command your judgments, choices, efforts, and what isn't everything else. The broken jug wasn't a tragedy, it was a test. Will you rage against physics, or will you sweep up the pieces and keep walking? This parable works because it's visceral. Abstract advice like, accept what you can't change, slides off the mind, but the image of those clay shards lingers. It's the same reason modern therapists use metaphors, calling grief, waves, or anxiety a noisy radio. Stories bypass the intellect and speak directly to the nervous system. Epictetus took it further. His students didn't just hear about the jug, they handled one in class, dropping it themselves to feel the lesson in their bones. That's emotional coding, transforming philosophy into physical experience. So what's your broken jug? Maybe it was a job loss you fought like an enemy until it led you somewhere better. Or a relationship that had to fracture so you could grow. Resistance often comes from mislabeling, calling something wrong when it's just real. The jug wasn't wrong to break, it was fragile by design. Epictetus would urge you to interrogate your resistance. Is this pain from the event or from my belief that it shouldn't have happened? That question alone can unknot suffering. His genius was in scale. The jug could represent a spilled coffee or a collapsed empire, the principle holds. When Rome exiled him, he didn't plead or protest. He founded a school on the edge of the known world. The man who taught with broken pottery rebuilt lives from the ruins of exile. That's the ultimate test of a story. Does it hold up when the stakes are life and death? 2,000 years later, we're still piecing together his lessons, one shard at a time. The Stoics didn't just talk about self-control, they brought it to life through wolves, dogs, and foxes. Animals became their living metaphors, stripping human complexity down to instinctual truths. Take the famous Stoic fable of the dog tied to a cart. At first, the animal strains against the rope, choking itself in protest. But when it learns to run alongside the cart, movement becomes effortless. That's not just a story about a dog, it's a masterclass in acceptance, teaching us that resistance magnifies suffering while adaptability eases it. The Stoics knew something modern psychology confirms. We remember visuals better than lectures. Aesop's tortoise beats the hare not because slow and steady wins the race, but because the image etches persistence into our minds more deeply than any sermon could. Fast forward 2,000 years, and you'll find the same technique in Jonathan Haidt's elephant and rider metaphor. The emotional mind is the powerful elephant, all instinct and momentum, while the rational mind is the rider trying and often failing to steer. The Stoics would have nodded in recognition. Their animal parables served the same purpose, making the invisible struggle of self-mastery visible. When Seneca described anger as a wild beast, he wasn't being poetic. He was giving us a mental model to recognize that surge of heat before it hijacks us. Here's where it gets practical. The Stoics didn't just tell these stories, they turned them into mirrors. Imagine Epictetus asking a student, "What animal does your envy resemble?" Is it a snake coiled and waiting to strike, or a vulture circling what others have? By externalizing emotions as creatures, we gain the distance to observe them without being consumed. Modern therapy uses similar tools, naming anxiety as a chattering monkey or procrastination as a seductive siren, because when we personify our struggles, we can negotiate with them. Try this exercise tonight. Think of a recent emotional reaction, frustration, fear, excitement, and match it to an animal's traits. Did you respond like a cornered cat, all hissing defensiveness? Or a deer frozen in headlights? The power isn't in the label but in the perspective shift. Suddenly, you're not just feeling, you're witnessing. That's the genius of these fables. They turn introspection into a safari, where we study our own instincts with curiosity instead of judgment. The deeper lesson: animals don't moralize their nature. A wolf isn't ashamed of its hunger. A fox doesn't apologize for cunning. The Stoics urged us to observe our human impulses with the same neutrality, not to excuse them, but to understand their roots. Your temper isn't bad, it's a territorial bear guarding what feels threatened. Your avoidance isn't lazy, it's a burrowing rabbit seeking safety. Recognize the pattern and you gain the power to redirect it. That's the ultimate gift of these ancient metaphors. They don't cage our emotions, they help us walk alongside them, like the dog finally running with the cart. Seneca wasn't just a philosopher, he was a playwright who understood the power of tragedy as a training ground for the soul. While others wrote plays to entertain, he crafted them to inoculate. His tragedies, filled with betrayal, loss, and chaos, weren't mere spectacles. They were emotional fire drills. Imagine sitting in an ancient theater, watching Medea slaughter her own children or Oedipus gouge out his eyes. The audience didn't just witness suffering, they practiced enduring it. That was Seneca's twist. His stories were rehearsals for life's inevitable storms. He knew something modern psychology now confirms. Exposure to controlled adversity builds resilience. This was the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils in narrative form. Instead of dryly listing potential disasters, Seneca dramatized them. Why? Because stories activate the mind differently than abstract advice. When you read about Hercules choosing virtue over pleasure, or Theists devouring his own sons, you're not just learning a lesson, you're living it vicariously. The gut-level reaction, the shock, the dread becomes a reference point for real-life trials. As Seneca wrote, "What you think is misfortune is actually training." His tragedies were the gym where minds lifted weights of despair to grow stronger. Here's the brilliance of this approach. Storytelling neutralizes fear by making the unfamiliar familiar. A soldier drilling for battle isn't paralyzed by panic when the real fight comes. They've already moved through the motions. Seneca's plays did the same for emotions. By immersing audiences in fictional catastrophes, he gave them a paradoxical gift, the chance to practice losing everything so they'd never be hostage to that fear. In Theists, the titular character loses his kingdom, his family, even his humanity. Yet the play's power lies in its aftermath, the realization that even such extremes can be survived. So how does this translate off the stage? Think of premeditatio malorum as mental time travel. Before a crucial meeting, imagine not just success but humiliation, the joke that falls flat, the proposal rejected outright. Sit with that discomfort until it loses its fangs. Seneca's advice was stark. Rehearse exile, torture, war, shipwreck, not to dwell in gloom but to disarm it. The sailor who's mentally weathered a storm is calmer when the waves rise. Try this exercise tonight. Pick a fear, failure, rejection, illness, and write it as a one-act play. Cast yourself as the protagonist, not the victim. How does the character adapt? What strengths emerge? Notice how scripting the worst-case scenario robs it of its terror. That's Seneca's legacy, not avoiding darkness, but learning to see in the dark. His tragedies remind us that fortune's blows are only devastating if we haven't trained to take them. And in a world of uncertainty, that training might be the most practical skill of all. Cato the Younger didn't just live by Stoic principles, he became a legend by dying for them. When Julius Caesar's forces closed in, Cato chose suicide over surrender, not as an act of despair but as the ultimate declaration of freedom. His story wasn't just a death, it was a manifesto written in blood, teaching later generations that some values are worth more than life itself. But here's the twist. The Stoics didn't celebrate his death, they celebrated how he lived. His daily rituals, like wearing simple clothing to mock vanity or walking barefoot in snow to practice discomfort, were rehearsals for that final moment. Cato's life was a masterclass in consistency, proving resilience isn't forged in crisis, it's polished in quiet, everyday choices. Then there's Socrates, the original Stoic before Stoicism existed. Facing execution, he didn't beg for mercy or rage against his accusers. He drank the hemlock as calmly as if it were his morning tea, turning his death into a lecture on integrity. His famous last words, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius." Even in dying, he was teaching, life is a debt we repay by living well. Plato preserved these moments not as history, but as moral blueprints. Every time someone retells Socrates' story, they're not just remembering a man, they're practicing courage by proxy. These figures became archetypes because their stories compress complex virtues into unforgettable images. Cato's torn robe after he ripped it in anger at corruption wasn't just clothes, it was a symbol of integrity refusing to be mended. Socrates scratching in the dirt with his toe while awaiting death wasn't just idle motion, it was serenity in action. The Stoics knew abstract ideals fade, but a man standing firm as the tide rises, that sticks. So who plays this role for you? Maybe it's a historical figure like Lincoln enduring the Civil War with humor and humility, or a modern athlete like Michael Jordan using failure as fuel. Perhaps it's someone closer, a grandparent who smiled through hardship, or a friend who turned loss into wisdom. The power isn't in their perfection, but in their pattern, the way they transformed struggle into strength, then left that story where you could find it. Here's the challenge: don't just admire these figures, reverse engineer their resilience. When faced with a petty annoyance, ask, how would Cotto handle this triviality? When fear whispers, channel Socrates' curiosity. What if this isn't an ending but my finest lecture? Archetypes aren't statues to worship, they're mirrors showing who we might become. The next time life demands more than you think you have, remember someone's story is counting on you to add another chapter. The Stoics didn't just walk through life, they framed it as a journey, complete with storms, wrong turns, and unexpected vistas. Marcus Aurelius loved the metaphor of life as a river, constantly flowing, carrying us through calm stretches and rapids alike. You can't step into the same river twice. He'd remind himself, not just as poetry, but as a mental model for accepting change. The river doesn't rage against obstacles, it adapts, finding new paths around rocks without losing its direction. That's the heart of Stoic resilience, moving forward without demanding the current bend to your will. Now imagine translating that ancient metaphor into something modern, life as a road trip. You plan the route, pack your bags, but halfway through, the engine sputters. A detour forces you onto a dirt road, and the map app has no signal. The Stoic traveler doesn't white-knuckle the wheel, cursing the broken plan. They lean into the unpredictability, knowing detours often lead to the best stories. Seneca put it bluntly, the person who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power. It's not about avoiding breakdowns, it's about packing the tools to fix them. Think of Epictetus, who compared life to a ship's voyage. The captain sets the course, but the wind decides the speed. Your job isn't to control the wind, it's to adjust the sails. He'd ask his students, when a storm blows you off course, do you waste energy blaming the weather, or do you recalibrate? That shift, from resisting reality to navigating it, turns chaos into adventure. Here's where the metaphor deepens. A road trip isn't just about the destination, it's about the mindset you bring to every mile. Stoicism teaches that suffering comes not from the potholes, but from insisting the road should be smooth. Marcus wrote, "The obstacle is the way, not a platitude but a travel guide. That flat tire, it's a chance to practice patience. The wrong turn, an invitation to discover a town you'd never have seen otherwise." Try this reframe next time life reroutes you. Ask, if this detour were part of the itinerary all along, how would I experience it differently? Suddenly, the traffic jam becomes people watching time. A cancelled flight is a chance to explore the airport bookstore. The Stoics knew something modern psychology confirms. The stories we tell about setbacks determine whether they break us or build us. Your journey isn't defined by the route you planned, but by how you respond to the unplanned. So pack light. Carry principles like adaptability and curiosity, but leave behind the heavy baggage of rigid expectations. After all, the best travelers, like the wisest Stoics, know that the most memorable journeys aren't the ones that go perfectly. They're the ones where you learn to enjoy the ride, even when the road disappeared beneath you. Stoicism and humor might seem like unlikely allies after all. We picture the ancient philosophers as stern figures chiseling wisdom into stone. But the truth is far more surprising. The Stoics were masters of laughter, wielding it like a scalpel to slice through life's absurdities. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical disability, put it bluntly, when you lose something, laugh at yourself instead of weeping. The universe is reclaiming what it lent you. Why protest what was never truly yours? That wasn't cynicism, it was liberation. Imagine spilling coffee on your shirt before a big meeting. You could rage or crumple, or you could chuckle at the cosmic joke, recognizing the spill as a tiny reminder of how little control we really have. The Stoics knew humor wasn't just levity, it was perspective armor. Take Seneca's Letters, where he describes a wealthy man tripping on his own purple robes, a slapstick moment that exposes the fragility of status. Or Marcus Aurelius joking about the courtiers fawning over him. They praise my wisdom, if only they knew how often I argue with myself in the mirror. These weren't throwaway lines, they were deliberate tools. By laughing at life's pretenses, the Stoics deflated the power of embarrassment, failure, and even grief. When Seneca wrote about a friend mourning lost riches, he didn't preach, he painted the scene like a satirical play. Look at him clutching empty coffers like they still held gold. Isn't it absurd to mourn an illusion? Here's why this works neurologically. Humor forces cognitive distance. When you laugh at a problem, you momentarily step outside it, seeing it as a spectator rather than a victim. Modern therapists call this externalization, but the Stoics were doing it centuries ago with dark comedy. Epictetus advised students to imagine their critics as barking dogs, not to dehumanize them, but to reduce their words to noise. If a dog barks at a statue, does the statue take offense? That shift from personal insult to impersonal sound is the essence of emotional aikido. So when was the last time laughter saved you? Maybe it was during a disastrous date where everything went wrong, and all you could do was laugh at the comedy of errors. Or perhaps it was a tense family gathering where someone's well-timed joke dissolved the room's frustration. The Stoics would call that more than relief, it's wisdom in action. They understood that humor doesn't negate suffering, it recontextualizes it, turning a crisis into a story you'll tell later. Try this reframe the next time life trips you. Ask, how will I recount this someday? Will it be a tragedy or the punchline to a joke you're not yet in on? The difference isn't in the event, but in the voice you use to narrate it. That's the Stoic secret. Tragedy plus time equals comedy, but you don't have to wait. The clock starts ticking the moment you choose to laugh. Folk tales survive centuries not because they're complex, but because they strip truth to its bones. Think of Aesop's fables. The tortoise wins not through some elaborate strategy, but by putting one foot in front of the other. The Stoics worshipped this same clarity. When Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do," he wasn't offering a 12-step program. He was handing you a compass in a world of fog. Modernity, though, turns emotions into Rube Goldberg machines, endless chains of overanalysis where sadness becomes, maybe I'm processing childhood trauma, and anger spirals into, do I have a right to feel this way? The ancients would have raised an eyebrow. Why build a labyrinth when a straight path exists? Consider the folk tale of the farmer whose horse runs away. His neighbors lament. What bad luck, the farmer shrugs. Good or bad, who knows? Days later, the horse returns with wild companions. What good luck. They cry. Again, the farmer says, who knows? When his son breaks a leg taming the new horses, avoiding a war draft, the pattern becomes clear. The moral isn't about horses, it's about withholding judgment. Marcus Aurelius framed it just as simply. Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. No therapy jargon, no identity politics, just a lever to flip in your mind. Yet today, we've turned serenity into a subscription service. Meditation apps, breathwork courses, journals with prompts, all useful tools, but layers atop a core truth the Stoics and folktales share. Suffering often stems from the stories we layer over events, not the events themselves. The boy who cried wolf didn't need cognitive behavioral therapy. He needed to stop lying. The Stoic equivalent, Seneca's razor. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Both traditions agree the solution isn't adding complexity, but peeling it away. So here's the challenge. Pick one emotional knot you've been untangling for weeks. Maybe it's resentment toward a coworker's promotion or anxiety about an upcoming decision. Now ask the folktale question. What's the 3-sentence version of this story? The coworker got what you wanted. You feel overlooked, the end. Or a choice is coming. You fear regret, the end. Suddenly, the weight lifts. Not because the problem vanishes, but because you've stopped drowning it in subplots. The brilliance of these ancient teaching tools, they bypass the modern obsession with why, which often becomes a hall of mirrors, and go straight to how. The fox doesn't psychoanalyze why the grapes are out of reach. He walks away. Epictetus didn't ask slaves to explore their childhood wounds. He taught them to distinguish what's theirs to control from what isn't. This isn't repression, it's liberation. When you stop narrating every emotion like a Netflix series and start treating it like a folktale, simple, stark, with a clear moral, you reclaim the pen from your overthinking mind. Try this tonight. Take a recurring worry and write it as a 4-line fable. Once, a rabbit feared winter would never end. He hoarded carrots until his burrow overflowed. Spring came anyway. The rabbit learned preparation is wise, but trust is wiser. See how the bones of the lesson emerge when you shed the flesh of overcomplication. That's the alchemy the Stoics and storytellers mastered, turning life's noise into signals even a child could follow. And somewhere, Epictetus smiles, whispering, "You knew the answer all along. You just buried it under layers of unnecessary why." Fairy tales don't just entertain, they train. Beneath the magic and monsters lies a fundamental lesson the Stoics would recognize instantly: the art of separating what we can change from what we must accept. Take the serpent's gift, a lesser-known but piercing tale where a farmer saves a snake, only for it to later bite his child. The villagers demand he kill the creature in revenge, but the serpent whispers a truth that cuts deeper than fangs: "I am a snake. Did you expect me to change my nature?" That's the dichotomy of control in fable form. The farmer couldn't command the snake's instincts, but he could choose his response. The story doesn't villainize the snake, it reveals the futility of raging against reality. This pattern repeats across cultures. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel trades her voice for legs, believing love will follow, only to discover she can't control the prince's heart. The tale's original ending, before Disney softened it, is pure stoicism. She dissolves into sea foam, not as punishment, but as a consequence of betting her happiness on an uncontrollable outcome. Meanwhile, Cinderella thrives by focusing on what is hers to command: her kindness, her work ethic, her refusal to let cruelty harden her, the stepmother's abuse. Beyond her control, her choice to keep sewing by the fire anyway, that's where her power lies. So which fairy tale villain mirrors your uncontrollable fears? Is it the relentless giant from Jack and the Beanstalk, symbolizing forces too large to defeat head-on? Or perhaps the witch in Hansel and Gretel, embodying the unpredictable dangers lurking just off the path? The brilliance of these stories is how they externalize our anxieties, turning abstract worries into figures we can outwit or outlast. The Stoics did the same when they personified hardship as a sparring partner, not to fight but to train with. Here's where the metaphor sharpens. Fairy tales often resolve when protagonists stop fighting the unbeatable and start working around it. Rumpelstiltskin isn't defeated by strength, but by uncovering his name, a reminder that understanding a problem often trumps overpowering it. The Stoic parallel, Epictetus's question, What's the nature of this thing that bothers you? Define it clearly, and you strip it of its mythic terror. Try this reframe next time life feels like a dark forest. Ask, am I facing a dragon to slay or a river to cross? One demands weapons, the other adaptability. Fairy tales and stoicism agree. The hero isn't the one who never stumbles, but the one who learns to read the terrain. After all, even the big bad wolf was just a creature following its nature until the third pig built a house that couldn't be blown down. The lesson: don't waste breath cursing the wind, lay better bricks. Marcus Aurelius didn't just wake up and face the day, he composed it. Every morning, he'd sit with his journal and set the tone like a playwright drafting the first act of a drama. Today I shall meet interference, ingratitude, insolence. He'd write not to dwell on negativity, but to rehearse his responses. This wasn't pessimism, it was narrative foreshadowing. By scripting the challenges ahead, he transformed them from chaotic surprises into plot points he was prepared to navigate. Think of it as emotional pre-production. When the actors of frustration or distraction showed up on set, Marcus had already directed his inner protagonist on how to stay steady. Evening rituals completed the arc. Like an editor reviewing daily footage, he'd ask, where did my character falter? Where did courage shine? His famous line, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," wasn't just philosophy, it was a screenwriting principle. Heroes aren't defined by their circumstances, but by how they frame them. When Marcus wrote, "The impediment to action advances action," he was essentially saying that villainous setback. Rewrite it as a catalyst. Here's how to steal his technique. Tonight, take a mundane frustration, a traffic jam, a missed deadline, and recast it as a scene in an epic. Give it a title: The Day the GPS Betrayed Me or The Printer War Chronicles. Suddenly, you're not stuck in traffic. You're the protagonist in a suspense sequence, learning patience. The printer isn't broken. It's the trickster god testing your ingenuity. This reframe works because our brains are wired for stories, not bullet points. Neuroscience shows we remember information better when it's embedded in narrative, which is why you forget work memos but recall movie plots years later. The Stoics took this further with prosocial attention as an editing tool. At day's end, they'd mentally replay events like film reels, cutting unnecessary reactions. Why did I snap at that email? And amplifying noble moments. I stayed calm when the meeting derailed. Seneca called this the scrutiny of conscience, but it's really storyboarding your growth. Imagine reviewing your day as if it were a documentary. What's the central theme? Where's the character development? Try this tonight. Open your notes app and draft 2 sentences, one for the day's external plot, "The client rejected the proposal," and one for the internal arc, "I felt disappointment but regrouped quickly." That's the Stoic 2-act structure: events plus interpretation. Over time, you'll spot patterns. Maybe your villains are always time pressure or perfectionism. Now you've identified your recurring antagonists, and every hero needs to know their foes. The brilliance of this practice: it turns life into a living epic where you're both author and protagonist. Marcus didn't journal to record history, he wrote to shape it. When he noted, "The universe is change, life is opinion," he was reminding himself that the raw material of each day is neutral. Our stories give it meaning. So tomorrow morning, before the world intrudes, draft your opening scene. Will your character meet chaos with curiosity? Will the climax reveal resilience or resignation? The pen is in your hands, and the next plot twist is always yours to narrate. The Stoics didn't just observe nature, they studied it like a living textbook, decoding resilience from the way reeds bend without breaking or rivers carve paths through stone. Seneca marveled at trees standing bare through winter, their branches seeming dead, yet secretly gathering strength for spring. That wasn't poetry, it was a survival manual. He wrote of oaks shattered by storms while willows swayed, and survived not to praise fragility, but to spotlight the wisdom of yielding. Nature's allegories became his classroom. The pine that snaps under snow while the bamboo bows and rebounds, the cliff eroded by waves yet still standing, reshaped but unbroken. These weren't just observations, they were coded instructions for human endurance. Consider the olive tree, a favorite Stoic metaphor. It thrives in rocky soil, its gnarled roots gripping stone, turning hardship into nourishment. The Stoics saw themselves in those roots, not fighting the rocks, but learning to grow between them. Epictetus, exiled and crippled, mirrored this when he taught. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you will go on well. It's the olive's lesson: adapt to the terrain or never bear fruit. Even the seasons carried Stoic weight. Winter wasn't just cold, it was nature's premeditatio malorum, a rehearsal for scarcity. Seneca noted how dormant fields pretend poverty to conserve energy, a strategy he urged his students to mimic. Store inner resources when times are easy, so you can draw on them when frost comes. Parallel to modern life is startling. We rush to avoid discomfort while nature and the Stoics invite us to see hardship as cyclical, necessary, even fertile. A forest fire isn't just destruction, it's how the soil learns to renew itself. So what natural metaphor mirrors your current struggle? Maybe you're a river blocked by boulders. Remember, water never wastes energy raging against obstacles. It finds new channels or rises patiently until it can flow again. Or perhaps you're a seed buried in darkness, mistaking the pressure around you for ruin, not the compaction needed to sprout. The Stoics would urge you to interrogate that image. What if this darkness isn't your tomb, but your cocoon? Here's the twist nature teaches and Stoicism reinforces. Flexibility isn't surrender. A palm tree in a hurricane bends so low its fronds touch ground, yet when the wind passes, it springs back taller. That's the essence of amor fati, not just enduring fate, but embracing its shaping power. Your storms aren't deviations from the plan, they're part of the growth algorithm. Tonight, try this. Walk outside and find one element: a cracked sidewalk weed, a cloud changing shape, a tide smoothing rocks. Ask, what's its survival strategy and how can I borrow it? The answers won't come as philosophy treatises, but as whispers from the earth itself. After all, the oak and the reed have been debating resilience for millennia. Which one's story will you wear today? Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and Stoic philosophy share a hidden blueprint. Both are maps for navigating the wilderness of human struggle. Campbell's monomyth begins with a call to adventure, that moment when ordinary life is shattered by challenge. For the Stoics, this is the first brush with fate's unpredictability, the illness, the betrayal, the loss that whispers, this wasn't part of the plan. The hero, whether Odysseus or Marcus Aurelius, doesn't get to veto the call. Their power lies in how they answer. Consider the belly of the whale, Campbell's stage where the hero is swallowed by the unknown. For Stoics, this is Seneca's exile, Epictetus's enslavement, or your own version of hitting rock bottom. The lesson isn't in escaping the whale, but in realizing this darkness is where transformation happens. The Stoics didn't just endure their trials, they treated them like alchemical furnaces, burning away illusion to reveal their core strength. When Marcus wrote, "The obstacle is the way," he was scripting the hero's midpoint, twist the revelation that the dragon guarding the treasure is also the key to unlocking it. Then comes the road of trials, where Campbell's hero faces successive tests. For the Stoic, this is daily life itself, the rude co-worker, the missed promotion, the traffic jam that frays patience. Small battles but cumulatively decisive. the ancient philosophers urged students to see these not as nuisances, but as training grounds. Epictetus put it bluntly, difficulties show what men are. Every minor irritation is a chance to rehearse for the major crises, like a knight sparring with wooden swords before facing the real dragon. Here's where the paths converge. Campbell's hero returns with the elixir, the hard-won wisdom to share, the Stoic equivalent, amor fati, the love of fate, not just accepting what happened, but embracing it as the very thing that forged you. Think of Nelson Mandela emerging from prison not bitter but visionary, or Malala Yousafzai transforming a bullet's trauma into a global crusade for education. Their heroism wasn't in avoiding suffering, but in rewriting its meaning. Now, your turn. What's the working title of your hero's journey? The job loss that led to a new passion. The breakup that taught self-worth. Every great story needs tension. Without it, there's no arc, no growth. The Stoics would urge you to stop resisting your plot twists and start interrogating them. What is this challenge preparing me to become? Try this reframe today. When frustration strikes, mentally slot it into Campbell's framework. That delayed flight isn't a logistical nightmare, it's your meeting with the mentor, a forced pause to reflect. The project setback isn't failure, it's the ordeal that precedes your third act breakthrough. Suddenly, you're not a victim of chaos, you're the protagonist in a story where even the darkest chapters serve the narrative. The genius of this fusion, it turns passive endurance into active authorship. Campbell's hero doesn't just survive trials, they're transfigured by them. The Stoics didn't just weather storms, they learned to sail by them. Your life isn't a series of random events, it's a myth in the making, and every challenge is a line in your epic. The pen is in your hands. What will the next chapter reveal? Proverbs are the ancient world's tweet-sized wisdom, compact stories that fit in the palm of your mind, ready to unfold when life demands them. Take the Stoic gem, the obstacle is the way. 4 words, but beneath them lies an entire narrative arc. The hero faces a wall, assumes it's a dead end, then discovers it's actually the path. That's not just advice, it's a plot twist in miniature. The Stoics mastered this alchemy, distilling epic resilience into phrases so portable, you could carry them into battle, a boardroom, or a broken heart. Imagine Epictetus watching a student rage against unfairness and handing them this mental tool. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Suddenly, the problem isn't the event, it's the story wrapped around it. These proverbs work because they're more than statements, they're invitations. When Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he wasn't just diagnosing anxiety, he was offering a narrative intervention. Picture a runner paralyzed by fear of losing. That proverb doesn't lecture, it reframes, asking, what if the worst-case scenario you're rehearsing isn't a prophecy, but a fiction? Like a folk tale's moral, it sticks because it's sticky with relevance. Now the pivot to power, crafting your own. Every obstacle you face comes with a hidden proverb waiting to be mined. Stuck in traffic, stillness is the cradle of clarity. Facing criticism, feedback is the wind that trims my sails. The formula is simple, name the struggle, then reveal its redeeming edge. Marcus Aurelius did this constantly in his journals, turning grumbles into grist. The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it. That's not optimism, it's alchemy. Try this today. Pick one friction point in your life, a delayed flight, a strained conversation, and squeeze it into a proverb. Don't polish it. Rough drafts often hold the most truth. Maybe your first attempt sounds like, "Detours show me roads I'd never choose but need to travel." Clunky, maybe, but the act of compressing chaos into a guiding phrase does something profound. It hands you the pen in your own story. After all, the Stoics didn't just collect proverbs, they lived by them, proving that the right words at the right time aren't just comforting, they're catalytic. Your turn. What's the proverb whispering inside your current challenge? Listen closely. It might be the shortest, fiercest story you'll ever tell. The ancient Stoics didn't shield children from life's harsh edges. They handed them stories like mirrors, letting them glimpse their own strength reflected back. Consider the fable of the two wolves, where a grandfather teaches his grandson about the internal battle between anger and calm. The lesson wasn't just about emotions, it was a toolkit disguised as a bedtime story. While modern parenting often races to sanitize discomfort, awarding participation trophies or scripting apologies, the Stoics saw adversity as the whetstone that sharpened character. Their fables were emotional obstacle courses, training kids to navigate fear, loss, and frustration long before those storms hit in earnest. Take the tale of the boy who cried wolf, a Stoic staple. Today, we might focus on the moral about honesty, but the ancients zeroed in on the boy's panic when the real wolf came. That moment of terror, they'd argue, was the point not to traumatize but to inoculate. By letting children sit with the consequences of the boy's actions through story, they practiced resilience by proxy. Contrast that with modern tendencies to soften every blow. A child falls, and we rush to erase the scrape before they even register the sting. The Stoics would ask, how will they recognize their own strength if we never let them skid their knees? Yet the Stoics weren't cruel. Their stories balanced hardness with hope. Aesop's ant and grasshopper didn't just punish laziness. It showed preparation as a form of self-care. The grasshopper's winter suffering wasn't glorified, it was framed as a natural result of choices, a cause and effect lesson wrapped in metaphor. Modern psychology echoes this with natural consequences, but the Stoics packaged it in narratives kids could carry like talismans. When a child heard about the tortoise beating the hare, they weren't just learning patience, they were internalizing that effort compounds even when no one's cheering. So what's your resilient story? Maybe it was the ugly duckling's journey to belonging that taught you rejection isn't final, or the little engine that could mantra that became your inner soundtrack during tough exams. These narratives work because they don't lecture, they let the child feel the struggle and resolution in a safe space. The Stoic twist, they always included a moment of agency. The third little pig didn't just hide, he built a better house. The message was clear: hardship isn't something to avoid, but material to build with. Here's where modern parenting could steal a page. Instead of saying, "Don't worry, try, remember the fox who couldn't reach the grapes. What did he do next?" That pivot from reassurance to resourcefulness is the Stoic secret. It's not about dismissing fear, but arming kids with stories where characters face dragons and discover their own swords. After all, childhood scrapes are rehearsals for life's fractures. The question isn't whether they'll fall, it's whether they've heard enough tales of getting back up to know it's possible. Tonight, try this. Ask a child in your life about a challenge they faced, then match it to a fable. Did they feel left out? That's the ugly duckling's territory. Frustrated by a difficult task, hello, tortoise and hare. You're not just telling stories, you're handing them a compass for when their own woods grow dark. Because the best tales don't just end with happily ever after. They whisper, "You've got this," and if you forget how, remember the wolf, the grapes, the ants, and the heroes you didn't realize you were training to become. The Stoics saw life as a forge, not a place of destruction, but of transformation. Marcus Aurelius wrote of hardships as the smith's hammer, each blow not meant to shatter us, but to shape us. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Picture a blacksmith's workshop, the roar of the furnace, the hiss of hot metal meeting water. Raw iron enters soft and untempered, but through fire and force, it emerges as a blade capable of holding an edge. The Stoics argued we're no different. Comfort leaves us dull, friction sharpens us. Seneca put it bluntly, fire tests gold, adversity tests strong men. This metaphor runs deep in their teachings. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical disability, compared the soul to a sword that only gains strength through repeated strikes. "Do you wish to be invincible?" he asked. "Then never enter a contest where victory isn't in your power." Like a master smith choosing the right steel, he taught his students to discern what could be hardened, their will, their perspective, from what would always remain brittle, like external validation or others' opinions. The anvil of circumstance doesn't care if you're a prince or a pauper. It only asks if you'll bend or break. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, not hiding the cracks but illuminating them. The Stoics were the kintsugi masters of the mind. When Marcus wrote, "The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it," he wasn't romanticizing pain, he was pointing to its alchemical potential. A blacksmith doesn't curse the hammer for striking, he uses its force to mold something greater. So what's your forging story? Maybe it was a failure that scorched your pride but taught you humility, or a loss that hollowed you out only to make space for deeper resilience. The Stoics would urge you to examine that scar not as a wound, but as a welled evidence of where you are joined back stronger. Here's the twist: the forge isn't just about endurance. A smith doesn't randomly pound metal, he follows a blueprint. Likewise, the Stoics taught that hardship without reflection is just noise. After every blow, they'd ask, "What is this revealing about my edges that need filing? Where am I still soft?" Journaling was their cooling bath, a place to inspect the day's heat and see what shape it left. Try this reframe today. When resistance comes, whisper, "I am in the forge." That difficult conversation, it's tempering your patience, the project that strains your skills, hammering your competence sharper. Even the small irritations, the traffic jam, the delayed email are like the smith's file, rasping away at your rough spots. The question isn't whether you'll face the fire, it's what you'll let it make of you. Stand in any blacksmith shop and you'll notice something. The tools bear marks too. The anvil is dented, the hammer's handle worn smooth. The Stoics celebrated this, not just the perfection of the blade, but the beauty of the process. Your dents and calluses aren't flaws, they're proof you've been at the work. So next time life swings the hammer, remember, you're not the metal being broken. You're the sword being born. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the canvas where meaning takes shape. The Stoics understood this deeply, weaving pauses into their stories like hidden chambers where wisdom could breathe. Think of Epictetus, who told his students to pause and reflect, like a scribe dipping his pen in ink, not to hesitate out of fear, but to create space between impulse and action. In his teachings, silence wasn't passive. It was the fulcrum where raw emotion could be levered into clarity. Picture a heated argument where words fly like arrows. The Stoic move, step into the quiet between breaths, as if slipping behind a curtain where the noise can't follow. That gap, no matter how brief, is where agency lives. Consider the parables that linger longest in memory. They're not the ones crammed with action, but those with weighted silences: the farmer who doesn't answer his neighbor's cries of bad luck, the sage who meets insults with stillness. These pauses aren't empty, they're narrative pressure chambers. Seneca's letters master this rhythm. He'll deliver a piercing insight, then leave a blank space, not for dramatic effect, but to let the reader's mind mirror the lesson. When he writes, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage," the unspoken question hangs: what will you do with that truth? The silence that follows isn't an ending, it's an invitation to begin. Here's how to weaponize this in daily life. Next time tension rises, a provocation, a stressful email, insert a mental ellipsis. Literally count 3 heartbeats before responding. In that span, borrow Epictetus's razor. Is this within my control? Does this reaction serve my best self? Ancient rhetoricians called this aposiopsis, the deliberate breaking off of speech to let the unsaid resonate. Modern neuroscience confirms its power. Silence triggers the prefrontal cortex, shifting the brain from reactive to reflective mode. That tiny pause is where you switch from actor to author of your story. The brilliance of Stoic silence, it's portable. You don't need a meditation cushion or a retreat. The pause before you refresh your inbox, the breath you take when your child interrupts, these are micro-forges for resilience. Marcus Aurelius journaled about the quiet mind, not as a distant ideal, but as a daily practice. You can retreat into yourself anytime. Nowhere is quieter or more untroubled than your own soul. Notice the verb retreat, not escape but regroup. Tonight, try this. Recall a recent moment when emotion overran you. Rewrite the scene with a silence inserted where anger could have cooled, where haste might have yielded to intention. That's the Stoic edit, not deleting the conflict but spacing it with stillness, because the best stories aren't those without storms, but those where the hero learns to stand in the eye. And the eye, by definition, is silent. Stoic comedy might sound like an oxymoron. What could be funny about accepting suffering? But the ancient philosophers knew laughter wasn't just medicine, it was a weapon against life's absurdity. Seneca wrote that we should greet misfortune with a chuckle, not because it's trivial, but because taking it too seriously hands it power it doesn't deserve. Picture him watching a man trip over his own toga in the forum and mutter, "This too shall pass," with a wry smile. That's the Stoic punchline. The universe doesn't care about your plans, so why not laugh when it derails them? Modern absurdist humor thrives on this same principle. Think of the meme where a dog sits in a burning room saying, "This is fine." It's not nihilism, it's amor fati in internet slang, a way to acknowledge chaos while refusing to let it crush you. The Stoics didn't just tolerate life's absurdities, they weaponized them. Epictetus, born a slave, joked about his limp. "If you're upset by my lame leg, shall I apologize for it? Or shall I remind you that your judgment is the real disability?" That's gallows humor with a philosophical edge. Today, we see this in comedians like Stephen Wright deadpanning, "I spilled spot remover on my dog. Now he's gone." The joke works because it mirrors Stoic logic. Some things are so ridiculous, the only sane response is to laugh. Even Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who carried Rome's weight on his shoulders, journaled about imagining his critics as chirping birds, not to dismiss them, but to shrink their noise to its true size. Here's where it gets practical. Absurdity exposes how arbitrary our stressors often are. The coworker who nitpicks your formatting, in the grand scheme, as inconsequential as a fly buzzing against a window. The delayed flight that ruins your day, a blip in a cosmos where stars explode silently every second. The Stoics would urge you to zoom out, not to minimize your frustration, but to contextualize it. Seneca's advice was brutal and brilliant. You cry over lost money. Imagine how ridiculous you'd look weeping over a broken cup. The lesson isn't to suppress emotion, but to question whether the drama we assign to events matches their actual scale. Try this reframe today. Pick one thing you're over-serious about, maybe your inbox clutter or the way your partner loads the dishwasher wrong. Now imagine explaining it to an alien. "Yes, extraterrestrial being, I lose sleep because tiny numbers on a screen don't go to zero fast enough." The humor isn't just cathartic, it's revelatory. When we laugh at our own rigidity, we create cognitive wiggle room, a chance to ask, Could I drop this and still be okay? The genius of Stoic comedy. It doesn't solve problems, it dissolves their weight. A stand-up comic might joke, "I told my therapist I can't handle stress. She said, 'Have you tried not caring? Best advice ever.' That's Seneca in a hoodie." The punchline lands because it's true. Much of what we stress over is optional suffering, a story we're writing without realizing it. So next time life serves you a plot twist worthy of a sitcom, channel your inner Stoic comedian. The universe might be chaos, but you get to choose the laugh track. Dreams were never just random noise to the Stoics. They were the mind's nightly theater, where unmet emotions took the stage in disguise. Marcus Aurelius kept meticulous notes on his dreams, treating them like encrypted messages from his subconscious. He'd wake and ask, what unresolved tension is wearing this strange costume? For the Stoics, dreams weren't prophecies or mere chaos. They were stories the mind told itself to process what daylight logic couldn't resolve. Imagine a general haunted by battle dreams, not because the future held war, but because his waking life lacked the courage to confront a toxic friendship. The dream wasn't a prediction, it was a mirror. This practice of dream journaling was Stoic shadow work. Seneca wrote of dreams as the soul's unedited dialogues, where fears and desires stripped off their daytime masks. One of his students dreamt of chasing a golden chariot that always stayed just out of reach, a metaphor for his obsession with status that daylight rationality had buried. The Stoics would have called this prosoch, attention turned inward. By recording dreams, they traced recurring themes like detectives following a suspect's trail. The missed exit on a highway, the endless staircase, the teeth falling out. These weren't just odd images, they were plot twists in the subconscious narrative, pointing to areas where acceptance was fighting resistance. Try this experiment tonight. Place a notebook by your bed and jot down even fragments upon waking, not just events, but the emotions they carried. Did you feel panic in the dream about missing a flight? Or relief when the tidal wave turned to mist? The Stoics noticed patterns. Dreams of being chased often mirrored avoidance in waking life, while dreams of flying hinted at stifled potential. Your mind isn't just throwing surreal darts at a board, it's problem-solving through symbolism. Here's the twist: modern neuroscience backs this ancient practice. REM sleep is when the brain consolidates emotional memories, weaving unresolved experiences into narrative frameworks. A study at Harvard found people who journaled dreams gained insight into daytime anxieties they'd suppressed, proof that the Stoics were onto something profound. Your nightmares might be cliffhangers your psyche leaves dangling, waiting for you to write the resolution. So what's your recurring dream trying to tell you? If it's the one where you're back in school but forgot the exam, ask, where in my life do I feel unprepared? If it's the endless hallway with locked doors, what am I pretending isn't within my reach? The Stoics didn't just decode dreams, they used them as drafting tables, sketching alternate endings to their inner conflicts. Your turn tonight when the lights go out. Remember, you're not just sleeping, you're attending the oldest storytelling workshop there is, and the most revealing tales are the ones you whisper to yourself in the dark. The Stoics didn't just teach, they teased the mind into revelation with riddles that bent perception like light through a prism. Consider this ancient brain twister: what's lost when you gain anger? At first glance, it sounds like a tavern puzzle, but unpack it and you'll find a psychological trapdoor. The answer: peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the clarity to see solutions hidden beneath outrage. Epictetus loved these mental knots, tossing them to students like a blacksmith tossing red-hot iron, not to burn but to forge. His riddles were micro-training for emotional agility, forcing the solver to pivot from instinct to insight. Take another. What grows larger the less you acknowledge it? The Stoic answer: fear. Ignore a shadow and it looms, name it, and it shrinks to its true size. These weren't party tricks, they were cognitive jiu-jitsu moves, flipping unexamined emotions into self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius crafted his own version in his journals. What doesn't transmit light creates its own darkness. At face value, it's about candles. Drill deeper and it's a warning. Resist reality and you blind yourself to the path forward. Here's why riddles work where lectures falter. A direct command like "control your temper" triggers resistance, but pose a riddle and the mind races to solve it, stumbling upon the truth like a traveler spotting a hidden trail. The Stoics' new curiosity is the backdoor to change. Seneca proved this with his infamous, "Who's richer, the man with endless wealth or the man with endless wants?" The question isn't just about money, it's a Trojan horse smuggling in the concept of enoughness. Now, your turn. Craft a Stoic riddle from your last emotional challenge. Stuck in traffic, try: what moves faster when you stop fighting it? Answer: time. The more you resist the jam, the slower it crawls. Accept it, and minutes flow. Or take workplace envy. What shrinks when you give it away? Recognition. Celebrate others' wins, and your resentment evaporates. The formula is simple. Identify the emotional knot, then twist it into a question that invites reframing. The brilliance of this practice: it turns introspection into play. A riddle doesn't scold, it intrigues. When you chew over what's truly yours if even your body is on loan from nature. You're not just pondering mortality, you're rehearsing detachment with every guess. That's the Stoic secret. Wisdom sticks when it's discovered, not dictated. Tonight, try this. Recall a recent frustration and hammer it into a riddle. Write it on a slip of paper and tuck it in your wallet. Next time the emotion flares, unfold it and let the puzzle do its work. Because some truths are too slippery to grasp head-on, but when chased through the labyrinth of a riddle, they suddenly become yours to keep. Biographies weren't just records for the Stoics, they were blueprints for survival, written in the ink of lived experience. Diogenes Laertius' Lives of the Stoics wasn't a dry history book. It was a field manual for resilience, stitching together the ragged edges of human struggle into something resembling order. Take Zeno, the founder of Stoicism himself, whose philosophy was born from literal wreckage. When his merchant ship sank off the coast of Athens, taking his cargo and his livelihood to the bottom of the sea, he didn't drown in despair. He washed ashore and wandered into a bookstore where Xenophon's writings on Socrates stopped him in his tracks. In that moment, Zeno's loss became a pivot, not an end. Laertius didn't just recount this event as trivia, he framed it as alchemy. The moment misfortune burned away one identity to reveal another. The genius of these ancient biographies lies in their unflinching humanity. They don't sanitize their subjects into marble statues. Epictetus's chronicler notes his lameness from a master's brutality. Musonius Rufus's exile to a barren island. Clean's knights hauling water to afford philosophy lectures. These weren't footnotes, they were the main text, the message. Stoicism wasn't theorized in ivory towers. It was forged in the grit of lives that refused to break. When Laertius describes Cotto the Younger sewing his own wounds after battle or Seneca facing Nero's cruelties with eerie calm, he's not idolizing suffering, he's illustrating the raw materials of resilience. Zeno's shipwreck wasn't unique in its trauma, but in its aftermath. Most would have scrambled to rebuild their trade empire or cursed the gods. Zeno did something radical. He treated the disaster as a delivery. The sea didn't take his future, it handed him a new one. Laertius captures this pivot with a storyteller's eye, the soggy merchant kneeling in that Athenian bookstore. water still pooling at his feet, realizing the cargo he'd lost was never his true calling. The biography doesn't preach "love your fate." It shows a man living it, salt-stained and stunned, yet somehow awake for the first time. These stories endure because they're more than inspiration, they're instruction manuals in narrative form. When you read how Posidonius continued lecturing on ethics while gout twisted his hands, you're not just admiring his toughness, you're being handed a mental model. The next time pain threatens to derail your focus, that image flickers the philosopher steadying his voice as his joints scream. Biographies like Laertius work because they bypass the lectern and go straight to the mirror. So whose life story anchors you? Maybe it's not an ancient Stoic but a modern figure, Malala taking a bullet and returning fiercer, Mandela emerging from prison without bitterness, or a grandparent who weathered droughts but still planted trees. The common thread isn't suffering, but the stories they wrapped around it. Zeno could have narrated his shipwreck as a tragedy. Instead, he called it a beginning. Try this exercise today. Pick a biography, personal or historical, that stirs you. Now reverse engineer its turning points. Where did the subject reinterpret loss as redirection? When did they treat a setback as setup? The Stoics knew we don't need more advice. We need more proof that the advice works, and nothing proves like a life well lived. Your own story is being written right now. What will the next chapter reveal? The Stoics played a peculiar game with their fears, one that turned anxiety into an ally. They called it premeditatio malorum, but you might recognize it as the ultimate what if exercise. Picture Seneca sitting in his study, deliberately spinning out worst-case scenarios like a playwright drafting tragedies. What if I lose my wealth? What if I'm exiled? What if my child falls ill? This wasn't morbid fixation. It was emotional inoculation. By rehearsing disasters in the safe space of his mind, he drained them of their power to ambush him later. Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation training. The Stoics just knew it worked. Here's the twist: they didn't stop at imagining the catastrophe. They wrote the next scene, the one where they adapted, endured, even thrived. When Seneca envisioned poverty, he didn't wallow. He sketched himself savoring simple bread with the same delight as a feast. Exile became an opportunity to write masterpieces without Rome's distractions. The what-if game wasn't about predicting the future. It was about proving to themselves that no matter what the universe hurled their way, they'd already lived through it in their minds. That's why Seneca could face Nero's whims with eerie calm. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before it arrived. Try this tonight. Pick one fear gnawing at you, a job loss, a breakup, a health scare. Now write it as a 2-paragraph story. First, the disaster. The CEO calls me in. We're downsizing. My badge is deactivated by noon, but here's the Stoic pivot. Don't end there. Write the sequel. That night, I sit at my kitchen table, listing skills I've neglected. By week's end, I'm freelancing for a smaller firm that values my niche expertise. 6 months later, I'm earning less but working on projects that light me up. See how the narrative shifts from victimhood to agency. The fear doesn't disappear, but its fangs do. The brilliance of this practice, it transforms abstract dread into concrete problem solving. Epictetus compared it to sailors drilling abandoned ship procedures, not because they expect to sink, but because competence displaces panic. Modern research validates this. A Harvard study found that students who mentally rehearsed failing a test actually performed better, their brains treating the event as familiar terrain rather than a threat. Your what-if story isn't a jinx. It's a dress rehearsal where you're both the actor and the director. Now level up, add sensory details to your scenario. If you fear public humiliation, don't just write, "I forget my speech." paint the scene. My palms slick the podium. The crowd's murmurs swell as my mind blanks. Then a deep breath. I toss my notes aside and speak from the heart. Someone laughs, but it's kind. The next words come easier. Neurons can't distinguish vivid imagination from lived experience. That's why athletes visualize perfect routines, and why your brain starts categorizing feared events as survivable long before they happen. The Stoics knew one final secret: humor defangs the monsters we create. When crafting your what-if tale, borrow Seneca's wink. Imagine losing your phone and spending a week blissfully unaware of group texts. Picture your ex's new partner being terrible at Scrabble, giving you petty joy. Absurdity reveals how inflated our fears often are. A Roman senator fretting over a stain on his toga is comedy gold, until you realize we still do the same with coffee spills on suits. Your turn. Tonight, let your journal host the scariest what-if story you've been avoiding. Right past the disaster to the discovery. Because the Stoics weren't preparing for the worst, they were proving they'd already survived it on paper, making reality's blows feel like reruns rather than premieres. And reruns, they're always easier to watch. There's an old fable about a fisherman napping under the sun when a king approaches, dripping in jewels and flanked by advisors. The king, baffled by the man's idleness, lectures him, "Why aren't you out catching more fish? With enough work, you could buy a boat, hire crews, build an empire." The fisherman, stretching lazily, replies, "And then what?" Then the king beams, "You could retire and nap on the beach." The fisherman smiles, "What do you think I'm doing now?" This story survives across cultures, sometimes with Diogenes in his barrel scoffing at Alexander the Great, sometimes as a Zen monk unimpressed by a warlord's riches because it exposes a universal glitch in human wiring. We chase rewards we've already got. The Stoics didn't just admire this fisherman's logic, they weaponized it. Seneca wrote of wealthy men pacing their marble halls. They acquire riches to escape anxiety, only to find new anxieties in riches. The punchline: contentment isn't a destination. It's the decision to stop conflating more with enough. Fast forward to today, and we've industrialized this trap. Social media scrolls feed us infinite versions of the king's pitch. Buy this, achieve that, and then only then will you deserve rest. But the fisherman's question lingers, and then what? A modern parallel plays out in FIRE, financial independence, retire early movements where people grind to escape the grind, only to realize they've spent years postponing the very peace they sought. The Stoic twist: detachment isn't about rejecting ambition, it's about interrogating its promises. So what's your version of the fisherman's peace? Maybe it's realizing the promotion you're chasing comes with a commute that steals your mornings, or that the dream house requires upkeep that eclipses its joy. The Stoics would urge you to run a cost-benefit analysis, not just in spreadsheets, but in soul. What are you trading, and is the currency worth it? When Diogenes drank from a wooden bowl, then saw a boy cupping water in his hands, he smashed the bowl, laughing, "I've been carrying baggage I didn't need." That's the moment of clarity, when you distinguish between tools and trophies. Here's how to audit your own attachments. List 3 things you're striving for: a title, a possession, a milestone. Now ask, if I achieved this tomorrow, what would change, not externally but internally? Would your self-worth solidify or just shift the goalposts? The king in the fable never considers why he's still restless despite his palaces. He's too busy projecting his lack onto the fisherman. Modern psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill. The Stoics called it slavery to externals. The deeper lesson: contentment isn't passive, it's an active defiance of manufactured lack. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life," He wasn't romanticizing poverty. He was noting that most excess is insulation against fears we'd be better off facing. That fisherman isn't lazy. He's done the math and found the king's equation wanting. Try this reframe today. Pick one, king's promise. You've been chasing the salary, the accolade, the perfect home. Now script the fisherman's response. And then what? Sit with the silence that follows. In that space, you might hear the whisper of a truth the Stoics knew. Enoughness isn't a number. It's the moment you stop letting more narrate your story. Marcus Aurelius didn't just write for his own turbulent era. He scripted letters to the future, casting his words like stones across the river of time. In his meditations, he addresses an audience centuries unborn, urging them to see beyond the fleeting dramas of their age. Think of the whole universe of matter and how small your share. Think of the whole expanse of time and how brief your slice. This wasn't mere reflection, it was temporal engineering. By imagining future readers people like us, he transformed personal journaling into a communal act, threading his wisdom through the needle's eye of generations. Consider his famous exercise of viewing from above, a mental shift where he'd envision himself rising above Rome's chaos, watching human struggles as if they were ants scurrying over a mosaic. Soon you'll be ashes or bones, a name at most, and even that name is just a sound, an echo. At first glance, this seems morbid, but it's actually liberation in disguise. By telescoping his perspective, Marcus wasn't dismissing life's stakes, he was recalibrating them. The senator's insult, a blip in the scroll of history. The lost battle, a single brushstroke in a vast mural. This technique, now echoed in modern therapies like cognitive distancing, reveals his genius. He wasn't just writing about the future, he was teaching us to inhabit it. Now flip the lens. What if your future self, the version of you a decade from now, could narrate today's challenges? Imagine them scrolling back through this moment like archived footage. Would they wince at your worries over a missed promotion, or nod at the quiet courage you showed in a difficult conversation? The Stoics called this premeditatio temporis, living your life in reverse. It's not about predicting specifics, but about aligning your present choices with the story you'll one day tell. When Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one, he was handing you the pen to draft a biography you'll be proud to reread. Science fiction often spins tales of time travelers observing their past selves. Marcus offered a low-tech version, journaling as a time machine. His entries weren't just records, they were messages in bottles meant to wash up on shores he'd never see. The universe is change, life is opinion. That line wasn't just for him, it was for you, reading it now, grappling with your own era's upheavals. He knew empires would fall, technologies would rise, but the core human struggles, fear, love, mortality, would remain. By writing to the future, he collapsed time, making your struggles and his feel like shared ground. Try this tonight. Open a notebook and address an entry to yourself 10 years from now. Describe today's frustrations, but through their eyes. That argument with your partner, they might remember it as the day you both learned to listen deeper. The career setback, the pivot that led to your true calling. Marcus didn't just endure his reign, he curated it for an audience of one, the man he'd become. Your life isn't just happening to you, it's being witnessed by the person you're growing into. Write accordingly, the brilliance of Marcus' future thinking. It turns mortality from a threat into an editor. When he mused, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say." He wasn't dwelling on death, he was sharpening life's focus. Every choice becomes a line in a letter your future self will open with gratitude or regret. The meeting you're dreading, the kindness you're hesitating to offer, how will they read in hindsight? That's the Stoic twist. the best way to prepare for the future isn't by controlling it, but by living in a way that makes any outcome part of a story worth telling. Cleanthes didn't just write philosophy, he sang it. As head of the Stoic school after Zeno, he composed hymns to Zeus not as religious pleas, but as rhythmic anchors for turbulent minds. Imagine workers in ancient Athens chanting his verses while hauling stones under the scorching sun. Lead me, O Zeus, by the path you ordain, for I'll follow unflinching. Should I refuse, a coward in revolt, I'll still follow, wretched. These lines weren't just poetry, they were cognitive tools hammered into meter to make surrender to fate feel less like defeat and more like a dance. The rhythm did what logic alone couldn't. It bypassed resistance, turning acceptance into something that moved through the body as much as the mind. There's a reason modern therapists use poetry in trauma recovery. When words are wrapped in cadence, they burrow deeper. A veteran grappling with PTSD might find solace in the structured repetition of a villanelle, just as Cleanthes' hymns gave structure to chaos. The parallel is startling. Both ancient hymns and contemporary therapeutic verse serve as containers for pain vessels that hold suffering at arm's length so it can be examined without consuming the holder. The beat of the poem becomes a heartbeat steadying the reader's own. Consider the difference between reading, "Accept what you cannot change," and chanting Cleanthes' lines. The first stays intellectual, floating in the air. The second, with its rising and falling cadence, becomes somatic, a mantra that muscles remember even when the mind wavers. Modern poets like David Whyte echo this. Start close in, don't take the second step before the first. The simplicity is deceptive. Like Cleanthes, Whyte packs resilience into rhythm, offering not just advice but a pulse to follow when the path darkens. Here's where it gets practical. Try crafting your own two-line Stoic mantra today. Not a paragraph, not an essay, just 2 lines with a deliberate beat. The constraint forces clarity. For example, the wind howls its protest, but the oak writes the reply in roots, not roars. Or, I am the riverbank, not the storm-swollen tide. The goal isn't eloquence, it's emotional portability. A mantra this brief can live in your pocket, ready to be pulled out when frustration spikes or fear hums too loud. Cleanthes knew something neuroscience now confirms. Rhythm regulates. When we sync our breath to meter, whether in a hymn, a rap verse, or a self-authored couplet, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, dialing down fight or flight. His hymns were ancient biohacks, using the body to steer the mind. Your turn. Find a struggle over commitment, perfectionism, heartache, and give it a cadence. I build where the fire burned, brick by borrowed breath. Suddenly, resilience isn't a concept, it's a chant waiting for your voice, the brilliance of Stoic poetry. It doesn't just describe resilience, it rehearses it. Every time you shape chaos into rhythm, you're practicing the Stoic art of reductio ad absurdum, shrinking monsters to manageable size by framing them in form. Cleanthes' hymns didn't eliminate suffering, they made it singable, and a burden that can be carried in song is never quite as heavy. The greatest stories leave room for the unknown, the hero's fate unresolved, the final chapter deliberately unwritten. The Stoics saw life through this same lens, not as a neatly bound volume but as a scroll still unspooling, where uncertainty wasn't a flaw in the narrative but its very essence. Epictetus put it plainly, you're an actor in a play whose ending you don't know. Your job isn't to demand the final scene, it's to perform your current role with excellence. That's the radical embrace of impermanence, treating each moment as both complete in itself and part of a larger, unfinished whole. Think of Homer's Odyssey, where the hero's return isn't the true end, it's the promise of further wanderings whispered in the last lines. Or modern classics like The Sopranos cutting to black mid-scene, leaving audiences to wrestle with ambiguity. These stories resonate because they mirror reality. The Stoics recognized that life's most painful tensions often stem from our craving for closure, the promotion that will finally make us feel accomplished, the relationship that will surely erase our loneliness. But what if fulfillment lies not in reaching the last page, but in savoring the sentences as they come? Consider the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and transience. A cracked teacup isn't discarded, it's mended with gold, its fractures made luminous. Stoicism applies this to our narratives. That stalled career, it's not a plot hole, it's a turn in the story you can't yet comprehend. The unresolved conflict with a friend, an ellipsis, not a period. Marcus Aurelius journaled about this daily, reminding himself that even an emperor's life was a little breath, a fleeting scene, and that was its power. The unfinished isn't lacking, it's alive with possibility. So what's your open-ended story? Maybe it's the creative project collecting dust, waiting for the right moment to resurge. Or the estranged family member you're not ready to reconcile with but haven't given up on. The Stoics would urge you to hold these threads lightly, not as failures but as subplots still unfolding. When Seneca wrote, "Life is like a play, it matters not how long but how well acted," he wasn't dismissing the future, he was freeing you to inhabit the present scene fully. Try this reframe today. Pick one unfinished area of your life and give it a working title like The Career Pivot, Season 1, or The Healing Years. Not to force resolution, but to honor the process. Notice how the label shifts your perspective from frustration at what's lacking to curiosity about what's emerging. The best stories aren't those tied with a bow, but those that leave us leaning forward, eager for the next page. Your life is that story, and the most compelling chapters might still be unwritten. From the broken jug of Epictetus to Seneca's shipwrecked merchant, these stories weren't just told, they were engineered. Each parable, each journal entry, every whispered proverb was a carefully coded survival strategy, passed down like a flame in the dark. The Stoics understood something profound. Abstract philosophy rarely changes behavior, but a well-told story rewires the nervous system. When Zeno's ship sank, it wasn't logic that transformed his despair into a new beginning. It was the narrative he chose to wrap around the wreckage. That's the alchemy we've inherited. Tales that turn detachment into liberation, resilience into reflex, and the present moment into fertile ground rather than a battlefield. Consider how effortlessly these ancient tools translate across millennia. A parent calming a child's nightmare with "the wolf wasn't so scary after all" is practicing cognitive reframing, the same technique Marcus Aurelius used when he journaled about insults as the yapping of small dogs. A modern executive repeating, "The obstacle is the way," before a high-stakes meeting is channeling Clean's hymns, using rhythm to steady the mind. These narratives endure because they're more than comforting lies, they're functional blueprints. Like a carpenter's jig ensuring precise cuts, Stoic stories shape emotional responses before life's chaos can splinter them. The true test of any tool is whether it works when the heat is on. When Nelson Mandela recited the poem Invictus in his prison cell, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul," he wasn't just quoting verse. He was accessing the same narrative technology the Stoics perfected, words as psychological armor. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancients intuited. MRI scans show that when we hear stories, our brains don't just process language, they simulate the events as if we're living them. That's why Epictetus had students physically handle a broken jug rather than just discuss loss. The hands taught what the mind couldn't grasp alone. So where does this leave us? Not as passive consumers of dusty wisdom, but as active participants in an unbroken chain of storytellers. Every time you reframe a setback as the universe rerouting me, or laugh at a minor disaster like Seneca's tripping aristocrat, you're not just quoting Stoicism, you're continuing it. Marcus Aurelius left us the ultimate clue. The universe is change, life is opinion. The stories we tell ourselves are the loom where raw events are woven into meaning. Your anxiety isn't just a feeling, it's a narrative in need of editing. Your resilience isn't a trait, it's a story waiting to be told. Now it's your turn. What's the Stoic story that's carried you through storms? Maybe it's the fable of the willow surviving the storm, or your grandmother's mantra about doors closing and windows opening. Share it below, not just as a comment, but as another stitch in the tapestry of survival strategies we're all weaving together, because the best stories were never meant to stay on the page. They're alive in the choices we make, the burdens we bear lightly, and the endings we refuse to accept until we've found the gold in the cracks. The scroll is still unspooling. What will your chapter